I told someone that my speech today was going to be on great opening lines. And they asked me what was my opening line for the speech. And I hadn't thought of that, so I'll just give one word, hello. Now, what would be wrong if that was the opening line in a book? By the way, feel free to shout out. I'm going to ask who the authors and the books are for various things. So just shout out, I won't call on you, okay? So what is wrong with that? Somebody want to tell me? Well, it's very short, and it doesn't go anywhere. Now, opening lines are important not just in books and articles. It's a way of hooking people in, of interesting them. I know Paul and I go to a lot of balls and parties, and I find myself usually seated next to some strange man, sometimes really strange. And my opening line is always, is it my job to charm you or your job to charm me? And if they smile, I know that they've got a sense of humor. If they look at me like I'm from outer space, I know that the next 2-3 hours is going to be very difficult sitting next to some stiff. Now, we have a lot of women here, and probably you may remember when you went to bars to meet people in the days before social media. And what a man said to us was very, very important, his first line. And then some people's opening line, remember, were on T-shirts, and they were usually obscene. And there was a big turnoff right there. And nowadays, an opening line is very important with things like Tinder. But an opening line for a book is more important because you're going to have to hook people in. You're going to say to them, listen to me for the next 3 or 4 hours or 300 or 400 pages. So if you don't start off right, they're going to say, why bother? Now, the most famous opening line actually is a bad one. It was a dark and stormy night. And that's, florid, the melodramatic, purple prose became famous in its own right. And surprisingly, the American Book Review listed that as number 22 for the best opening line of a novel. Hard to believe. So you can all relax. You can't write a bad opening line according to them. Now, what I want to do today is discuss several good ones and what the element is that made them successful and that got people to read it. And in many cases, it's not just one thing. And I'm not going to discuss this in any particular order. Later, I am giving you a little handout listing some of the things that you should think about when you are writing your opening sentence. So the first and most important thing, though, is you want to draw people in. You want to plant a question in their mind that the rest of the book, or at least the opening, will answer. Now, when I say plant a question, I don't mean necessarily use a question mark. I'll give you an example. This is a famous Graham Greene novel, Brighton Rock. Graham knew before he had been in Brighton 3 hours that they meant to kill him. Now, how did Graham know that people planned to kill him? What was he doing in Brighton? And of course, who meant to kill him? So right there you have he's given a reader 3 reasons to keep reading. Now, here's another opening sentence in which there's a question is posed. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Who wants to shout out what that is?
Great Gatsby?
Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, when you see that, you say, well, wait a minute. What was the advice that his father gave him that's so important that keeps turning over in his mind? So you are going to keep reading. Now, here's another one. Ironically, since the attacks, the sunsets have been glorious. What attacks? You want to read on. One of the most famous opening sentences was, "Mother died today, or maybe yesterday. I don't know." All right, who wants to guess that one? L'étranger, the stranger, Camus. Now you keep reading because you say, wait a minute, mother died today or maybe yesterday? He doesn't know when his mother died? And there, by the way, is really two opening sentences. Sometimes where you'll do a second one, it will explain the first. In this case, it actually adds confusion. You know, did she die today? Did she die yesterday? So, piques your curiosity. As it turns out, by the way, he received a telegram that day, but it wasn't clear when the telegram was sent, and that's why he asked. But you're going to keep reading to find out what is wrong with this man, that he doesn't know when his mother died. Now, another way to keep people reading is to say something, write something surprising or absurd. And remember that a lot of these good opening sentences have more than one element. It doesn't have to be that it's just a surprise. It can also be a question. It can be many of the things. I simply want to point out some things that you want to look for. Now, many years later, I'm quoting something now. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendito was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Does anyone know what that is? All right, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. That's how he began it. Now that's absurd. How do you discover ice? And of course the main question, why is he facing the firing squad? Now, as far as absurd first lines, they're very powerful because people want to know what the person is talking about. Famous short one, "It was a pleasure to burn." Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury. So you say, what burned? Why was there pleasure in this? What is he talking about? There's another one, not a famous author, but it's absurd. "Take my camel dear," said my Aunt Dot, as she climbed from this animal on her return from High Mass. Why did she take a camel to High Mass? Well, you are going to keep reading to find out. Now, a very famous bizarre one. "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. All right, that's George Orwell, 1984. That's absurd. How can a clock strike 13? Oh, but you know, this is interesting because 1984 was written in 1948, and he did not intend it to be hypothetical. And the reason you can tell that right from the first sentence, he didn't say sometime in the future the clock struck 13. He said on a cold day in April. So he wants the reader to believe it could and will happen. Now, one of the things that's very common in good opening sentences, and we're talking also paragraphs, is foreshadowing. Tell people what's coming so that they want to stick with it and learn. And by the way, that's especially good if any of you write mysteries. And this usually leads to questions. For example, this is from Ira Levin, who wrote Rosemary's Baby. Oh, his first book was A Kiss Before Dying. By the way, Ira, I knew him. His father was in, I think, the button business and wanted him to go into the button business, and he wanted to write. So his father said, "I'll support you for 1 year." And he wrote A Kiss Before Dying, which sold something like 23 million copies, and he never went into the button business. Now, his opening line for his first book was, His plans had been running so beautifully, so goddamn beautifully, and now she was going to smash them all. Now there's a lot of foreshadowing there, because something is going to happen, and someone is destroying or trying to destroy those plans. So it plants a lot of questions that the reader wants to hang in and find out. What were his plans that were ruined? Who is she who will ruin them? How will she smash them? Now again, the foreshadowing is one that I just gave you. Graham knew before he had been in Brighton for 3 hours that they meant to kill him. Now, again, we're foreshadowing that somebody wants to kill someone. This is obviously, when you read it, you know you are not reading the opening to Little Women. You've got a completely different spirit in there. Now here's another foreshadowing and question. Oh, when I say in question, meaning that it creates questions as well as foreshadowing. One day, I was already old. In the entrance of a public place, a man came up to me. Now you know that something is going to be said or happen with this man. Who is he, and why does it matter enough that somebody began their novel with it? Another thing I think you can look at, you have to be very careful if you do this, but when done right, it can add a lot, and that is repetition of words. It can be done slightly different. For example, when Ira said, his plans have been running so beautifully, so goddamn beautifully. So one uses different related words, but it can add a lot of power to it. This is the most famous one of repetition. It was the best of times. Oh, yeah. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief. It was the epic of incredulity. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. Okay, you all know where that comes from, right? Tale of Two Cities, right, Charles Dickens. And that's great because, yes, he's talking about best times, worst times, age, epic. They're slightly different, but it creates a fabulous rhythm. Now, that was written in 1859, and there are very few opening paragraphs that are better. Now, here's another one. Once upon a time and a very good time. James Joyce, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. You see how he used the word time twice. Now, another thing is to use powerful, strong, non-cliched words in your opening. Back to Ira, goddamn beautiful. Now, you have to be careful in using curse words, but just think of the difference if you wrote, I was angry versus I was damned angry. So there are places where it's very good to use that. Very common nowadays. He didn't write that she would ruin his plans. He wrote that she would smash his plans. One of the things that I try to do and I recommend is that if you're reading something where you can write on it, circle any of these very powerful words that people are using to give you the feeling that this is what you want to do. You don't want to use cliches. You don't want to use boring words. You want to use really powerful words. Another example, someone wrote in the opening line was, Cal wore a very peculiar coat. Now, supposing that first line had been, Cal wore a very unusual coat. Peculiar is a peculiar word. It draws you into, why was she wearing it? Why is this coat important enough that they mentioned it? Now, also, odd names create interest. Call me Ishmael. All right? Now, what do you think if it had been Call Me Irving? A little different, all right? This one is a weird name. It's unique. It's a biblical name. It's used oddly, and so is the construct. He didn't say, my name is Ishmael. He said, call me Ishmael. He's demanding you do something and demanding that you read him. Now, also, when you are writing, especially the opening paragraph, you want to set a mood. Now, and which is often, by the way, connected to foreshadowing. Now, here's an example. It was a queer, sultry summer. The summer they electrocuted the Rosenbergs, and I didn't know what I was doing in New York.
Sylvia Plath, the bell jar.
Yes, absolutely. Well,
Wow.
very, very good. Now, it's very interesting. I looked up what important things happened in 1953. She didn't say it was the summer that the polio vaccine was developed, or it was the end of the Korean War. She said they electrocuted the Rosenbergs. Immediately, she is establishing that something very, very bad happened. And she's going to tell you more. And by the way, it was 6 years later that she did commit suicide. And she uses good words too. A sultry summer, okay? And so she's telegraphing it's not a happy story. And then you're also wondering, what was she doing in New York? And again, we have the repetition, sultry summer, the summer they electrocuted. Now here's another example of setting and creating a mood. The city looked positively bleak, shrouded in the dying light, as if everything had been painted over with only black and white, an entire palette dampened to shades of gray. And you know, when you hear that, you know this is not a novel set in Las Vegas. Immediately you have a feeling of darkness. Now, it's very important that you establish your own style and that you hook people with it. And I'll read you probably the most famous example of a unique style, at least when he did it. Now, everybody copied him afterwards. But if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. All right? Catcher in the Rye, absolutely, okay? Now you feel that this person talking to you has something to say in his own unique way. It uses a lot of powerful words too. Lousy childhood, not a bad childhood, a lousy childhood. A David Copperfield kind of crap. Also, I'll get to that point in a minute, because you see the style there. Now compare that style to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Can you hear how differently those two people are speaking? And what you have to do is develop your own voice, okay? Now, sometimes honesty in writing. The Catcher in the Rye, do you remember they said, if you want to know the truth, you wonder then, will he tell us otherwise? Sometimes it makes you trust the storyteller more. The Catcher in the Rye, but I don't feel like going into it, as he said, if you really want to know the truth. Here's an example of an opening paragraph in which the person really tries to tell you the truth. I was born in the city of Bombay once upon a time. No, that won't do. There's no getting away from the date. I was born in Dr. Narlakar's nursing home on August 15, 1947. The time matters too. Anybody know that one? That's a roughie. Okay, Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children. He's correcting himself to be more honest. You're going to trust whatever he says from now on, and you want to read more because you know this person is going to tell you the truth, because he just corrected himself and said, I'm going to tell you the truth, right in the opening paragraph. Now, some people go in the opposite direction. Here's an opening line. This is a roughie, okay? All this happened more or less. All right, Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse 5. Now, it happened more or less. Did it not happen? Why can't he tell us all that happened? Now, often, a good opening paragraph will tell us about the main characters in order to introduce them, but also to interest us in them. Famous one, you may know this one. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Pivot Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. All right, who knows that?
Dorothy Park.
No? Oh, I do love her. Oh, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. So then you're reading and they say, wait a minute, who are the Dursleys? And who is wondering if they're normal? And why are they in such a huff about it that they're saying thank you very much? Which is good, by the way, for the unique style. Remember, we were talking about that a minute ago. I think it might be a much more ordinary opening line if it didn't say thank you very much. Now, a lot of opening paragraphs introduce the narrator, the person who's talking in the first person, and they're talking to the reader. Call Me Ishmael, it's the most famous. Now, here's one. Once upon a time, and a very good time it was, there was a moo cow coming down along the road. And this moo cow that was coming down along the road met a nicence little boy named Baby Tuckoo. That was James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. But what does it tell you about the narrator? Obviously, it's a child. He's talking about moo, coo, nicence, baby, tuckoo. So right there we know that the narrator of this is a child. Now sometimes people in their opening paragraph will try to introduce the subject. One of the most famous, as Gregor Samsa awoke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a monstrous vermin. Metamorphosis, somebody said, absolutely. So that tells you about him. And by the way, very good words there. Monstrous. It's so much better than big, right? Vermin. Much better than cockroach. Another example introducing the subject. Someone must have slandered Joseph K. because one morning, without his having done anything bad, he was arrested. So now we already know that he did something bad. It's an interesting word there, bad, not wrong, bad, okay? Now sometimes they will combine the subject and the narrator. Here's an example. Robert Cohn was once middleweight boxing champion of Princeton. Do not think that I am very much impressed by that as a boxing title, but it meant a lot to Cohn. Anyone know that one? That's a roughie. Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises. Now, you're not only learning about Robert Cohn in this, but you're learning about the narrator. Remember, he said that people might think that I would be impressed. Now, another thing is to use humor when possible in your introduction. Everybody wants to laugh. A famous one is, there was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Another, and it comes from The Fault in Our Stars, John Green, who I've just discovered the most wonderful writer. Late in the winter of my 17th year, my mother decided I was depressed, presumably because I rarely left the house, spent quite a lot of time in bed, read the same book over and over, ate infrequently, and devoted quite a bit of my abundant free time to thinking about death. Now, sex also sells, although, you have to be a little careful in the usage, but the most famous is Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins. And incidentally, again, remember what I was saying about using distinctive names? If that had been Jane, light of my life, fire of my loins, I don't know whether, well, his writing it would still have made it, but it's quite different that he used this interesting name that up until then I think nobody had used. And also there's a lot of foreshadowing there. A man is obsessed, light of my life. You know that this person is going to be very important to him. Now, I'll briefly want to just go over nonfiction writing. And all of my 26 books are nonfiction. Some fiction in there, too. Anyway, again, you're not trying to establish mood. You are trying to explain what the subject is. Now, it's famous that newspaper writing, you're supposed to answer the 5 W's. Who, what, where, when, and why. Now, we've gotten away from that a little bit, but you want to tell people what they're going to learn if they continue to read the article. And I'll read you an opening I wrote for a piece on for TV Guide. If you think that some of the television programs this season have been going to the dogs, take a closer look at the commercials. Not only are many of the stars dogs, but also any other type of animal that can hold the audience's attention long enough for the sponsor to achieve his goal, namely to take a bite out of the viewer's wallet. Now, that's immediate foreshadowing, because obviously this is an article about pets in television commercials. It's not about Little Women. Finally, I just want to go through a few things very quickly about opening paragraphs. And don't worry if you're struggling on this. As Stephen King says, he spends months, even years on it. One trick I have found, if it doesn't come to me, is that I can write around it. I don't worry about it. I write the rest of the piece, and then often right in there I'll say, that's what needs to be developed for the opening. So you don't want to, get too uptight if you can do that. Sometimes, if I have a really good opening, I'll split it in two and make half of it the end of the story. So, try working it in different ways if it doesn't seem to be working. Try it as first person. Try it as third person. Try and tell the opening paragraph from someone else's perspective. Think of Little Red Riding Hood from the bear's angle. You want to try it in present tense. You want to try it in past tense. You want to play with the order of the words. That's very important. Here's a Mickey Spillane opening. Nobody ever walked across the bridge, not on a night like this. Now, supposing he had started on a night like this, nobody walks across this bridge. Woo-hoo. I don't think you'd read much past that. Earlier, I read you one where the order is completely confused, but it makes you wonder. And that was one day, I was already old, in the entrance of a public place, a man came up to me. Now that's completely reversed. And it's something that you want to think about, and that's changing the order and not doing it in the way that it is expected. Another thing I think you need to do is to read things out loud. Read your opening paragraphs out loud to listen to the rhythm. A perfect example of wonderful rhythm is Lolita, Light of My Life, Fire in My Loins. Excuse me. He did not say Lolita, period. Light of My Life. It flowed. It's Lolita, comma, Light of My Life, Fire of My Loins. So that's something that you can hear when you say it out loud. No, his punctuation was really good. He wants you to keep reading and get to the sex part. Finally, look at opening lines. It turns out that I'm sure that all of you, or practically all of you, are on Kindle. And you can, for free, get the first 10% or so of a book and look at what they say. I'm working on a memoir right now. As soon as I see a review for a memoir, I download it for free on Kindle, and I check to see how they presented their story. And you will learn a tremendous amount by reading other people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.